Barely Research Facts is a fact-based podcast brought to you by Art Now Thus, an experiential arts agency based out of Mumbai. Each episode, we pick a word at random, dive into it, and see what it brings to us. We are your hosts. My name is Ragini, and this is Shar. Let's go!
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Barely Research Facts. The word for today's episode is hat.
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 Third time's a charm.
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 That's always a good thing to start with, incoherent laughter. So, hat. I really enjoyed it.
I loved it.
I thought there was a lot to dig into. We got quite a few different facts and factlets and little things that I was quite I had nerdgasms over.
Okay.
But we have to start somewhere. So do you want to start with, where did hats come from?
No, but I have a very cool story to start with, actually.
Tell.
Yeah, always. So basically, my story goes back to 9th century Scandinavia. And it's about this wonderful Viking king called Eric. I would imagine I know how to pronounce this by now, but I don't. I'm going to try. It's Eric Anundsson, I think, or Anundsson is how I'm going to say it, who was also nicknamed Eric Weatherhat.
Oh.
Yeah. But basically, he was nicknamed Eric Weatherhat because he had this wonderful, apparently magical hat that would allow him to turn the weather to his favor whenever he went on a conquest.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So very convenient for a Viking king, clearly.
Okay.
And then he would basically wear that hat, and he was this incredible conqueror as a result of it, and slowly was becoming very ambitious and started trying to expand his territory outside of Sweden and was trying to conquer parts of Norway. At the same time, in Norway, there was a young, enterprising king called Harald Fairhair.
Ooh.
It's a bit of a theme there. And so one time, there was this very wealthy farmer who decided to invite the two sovereigns over and have a chat with them and just kind of host them under his roof. And when he called Eric and Harold, he gave the better room, or the more lavish room, to Harold. And Eric really looked upon that as a major slight.
Uh-oh.
So, as most good kings are wont to do, he took him into the forest to try and have a conversation with him. And I don't think the peasant's answers, or the farmer's answers, really satisfied. He wasn't very happy with it. But he was diplomatic, and in the true fashion of a diplomatic king of the time, he beheaded him on the spot.
Of course.
Yeah, because that's what they did. And
What a time to be alive.
Just about. And well, when Harald Fairhair heard about this, he was really pissed off. So he sent a secret army, like a small portable army.
Portable.
And they were basically following Eric around the place. And this one time when he'd gone out hunting by himself, they started attacking him. And so he did this thing where he managed to escape, but he had to jump off a cliff to escape. Okay?
And then he created a snow bridge with his hat.
No, he lost the hat actually.
Oh no!
Yeah, he survived. The horse survived as well, which is nice.
Oh, thank God. Okay.
Yeah, but he lost the hat and thereafter began to lose all of his battles and then slowly lost everything.
Oh no.
And anyway, so it was a slightly tragic end for him. But the island on which he was chased and where he lost the hat is now called King's Hat.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's called King's Hat because on that island there is a pole, and on that pole there's a hat that's kept on it.
Yeah.
And legend has it that if you cross that hat and if you tip your hat to it, or if you just give it a wave, if you don't have a hat, you will be blessed with good weather for the rest of your journey.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a cute little story.
Yeah, it's a sweet story about how a king lost his hat and then lost his country. So, two ways to look at it.
Yeah, as other sweet stories go. I mean, it has revenge, it has betrayal, it has loss, it has beheadings. What else do you need?
Yeah.
And a magic hat.
Yeah, it just doesn't have any sex in it. That's the only thing missing. But somebody must have had babies at this point. So.
Yeah, I'm sure concurrently somewhere someone was having sex. It's all right.
Okay, so now we've added all the elements of a good story to it.
So let's put a pin in that.
Ooh! Well done.
These noises are in aid of my extremely bad pun, because the next little factlet is about hat pins.
Yeah.
So have you ever worn a hat pin? Have you ever had the chance to or the opportunity to wear a
No.
hat pin?
Quite unfortunate.
And neither have I. I need to. I need to go to a wedding or something and wear a hat. Like, hat pins are basically to secure more complicated and extravagant hats. And in the 1900s, they were quite elaborate. In the sense that they were bejeweled, and some of them would have feathers and, just all sorts of basically rich people shit. So in the early 20th century, women were allowed more freedom. Women were increasingly going out and into the workforce. They were working in banks. They were working in shops. So obviously they were going back and forth from and to their workplace from home. And that's when they were most vulnerable. In the streets especially. And so there was a spate of incidents where women were getting attacked and they had to come up with a plan to defend themselves. And obviously at the time, self-defense lessons and things like that weren't as common. So they used what they could, which is on their body, on their person. And a hat pin is the perfect weapon. So what they would do was, because it was a popular fashion accessory at the time, they would alter the hat pin to make it more formidable as a weapon. For instance, there was an incident on a normal rainy Tuesday in 1912 when 18-year-old Elizabeth Foley found herself in the midst of an armed robbery.
Oh dear.
Oh no.
Okay.
Yeah. So she'd been walking home with a male colleague from the bank, and someone came up behind them and accosted them. And because he knew that her colleague had all the entire staff's payroll in his pocket, and so he was in the know. And so he attacked them. Foley, however, was not shaken. In one swift movement, she reached for her hat pin, jumped at the robber, and aimed right for his face. Like, she was like, forget the jugular, she went for his face. And this is from an article in the New York Times where Foley was actually, the reason that it was newsworthy was because Foley was just one participant in a movement of women armed against male attackers.
With hat pins.
Hat pins. Yeah.
Wow. It was like the early pepper spray.
Yeah. And it was like, literally necessity is the mother of invention, because they used what was on their person.
Yeah.
It wasn't only used by women at the time, it also became a popular weapon for men.
Of course.
For instance, on May the 3rd in 1910, George Allmill, an engraver, was fatally stabbed with a hat pin in an early morning altercation outside his home. The hat pin was wielded by a young man, a neighbor. The two met shortly after midnight at a street corner. I mean, what shady business could go on there? Near their East Side homes. And they fought over something silly. And the neighbor happened to have a hat pin in his possession, and he stabbed him with it.
Wow.
Stabbed him in the stomach, and then...
Eesh, that's brutal.
Yeah. 7 inches long it was.
Ooh.
I'm resisting the urge to say that's what she said.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's the
biting my
story.
tongue.
So that's the story of the hat pin and how it had a blip in time where it was a cool fashion accessory, but also a weapon.
Are hat pins still used?
Yes, but only I'd imagine there were a lot of hat pins floating around during one of the prince's weddings in the UK.
One of them.
Because we don't have as elaborate, I mean, we use hairpins, I think, now. I'd rather use 24 hairpins than one long hat pin. Because I wouldn't have...
I would rather use a hat pin.
Clearly, you're that kind of person.
Yeah, I am. Completely. Okay. But, okay, I'm going to rewind a little bit from the history of the hat pin to the history of the hat. So I was also trying to just figure out how hats came into being. And there isn't a lot about it. Honestly, I think really it just comes down to everyone believing that at some point, some version of the early man decided that he would protect himself from the elements by wearing something on top of his head, whatever he could find. And then slowly it just grew on to becoming, of course, some hats are still used for protective purposes, but mostly hats just became something of a fashion statement. And then as time went on, hats became more and more flamboyant and they started becoming bigger. And then they sort of, just the way people wore and used hats was more for fashion than it was for any kind of utilitarian purpose. However, we do know that hats have been around for a very, very long time. They have played a prominent role throughout the development of civilizations, and hats have been found in artwork of ancient civilizations, including Egypt, Greece, Rome, and China. For example, ancient artwork from Egypt has revealed gods and kings wearing fancy hats. In ancient Rome and Greece, the lowest levels of society were not allowed to wear hats. Upon becoming official citizens, however, they were then presented with a hat as a symbol of their newly achieved status.
Really?
Yeah. The hats very quickly went from being something of, they were a status symbol from very early into their use.
Oh, that's really cool. Like citizenship and like a gift of a hat. Maybe when I become a citizen of here,
I'll gift you a hat.
Yes, thank you. At least someone gives me a hat. I will remember this, by the way.
I will.
Set reminder for self in 5 years. So, have you heard the term or the phrase mad as a hatter?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, where do you think it comes from?
Alice in Wonderland.
Yes and no.
What?
So, mad as a hatter is a phrase that's considerably older than Lewis Carroll's, Alice in Wonderland. It was probably popularized more because of the character, but it's linked to the hat making industry and something significant that used to happen to every worker in a hat making industry, which was mercury poisoning.
Ooh.
So these people who worked in these factories, they used this substance. It's like a derivative called mercury nitrate. And it was used as part of the process of turning the fur of small animals, such as rabbits, into felt for hats. And so, obviously, workplace safety standards, etc., non-existent back then. This is, I think, 18th and 19th centuries. So people used to get mercury poisoning, and it was known that it was a hat maker's disease or a hat maker's disorder. But some of the symptoms included physical and mental ailments, tremors, speech problems, emotional instability, and hallucinations.
Oh, wow. So it proper made them crazy.
I mean, yeah. And over the years, obviously, it got worse and worse and worse. And I mean, if Jeff from the hat making industry or from the hat makers in
Hello, Jeff.
Danbury, we're back to Jeff. But if Jeff from Danbury is saying that, I can see Egyptians in my home, I live with 12 Egyptians, and wouldn't something have to be done? But at the same time, people's got to work. People's got to earn.
Yeah.
And so I think that took precedence. And it was very commonly attributed to working in those factories. So people knew it happened, but nothing was really done about it. In fact, one of the centers of hat making was this place called Danbury in Connecticut in the US. It was a leader in hat making during the 19th century and the early years of the 20th century.
Uh-huh.
And the affliction was called Danbury Shakes.
Ah, okay. I mean, it does have cool names, though. You have to give them that.
Yeah, it sounds like a dance step, really. It sounds like you want to cut a rug, do the Danbury Shake, not to trivialize what happened to those poor people.
So everyone knew this was happening, and the factories just continue to run as per normal.
Yeah, why not? Why not? I mean, considering...
Health and safety. Yeah, why not? Who needs health and safety?
Yeah.
Who does?
I think a little bit of the Danbury Shakes didn't really shake them up. Interestingly, there's a little sub-fact that's related to this one. There's this man called Boston Corbett, who was a hat industry worker for a long time. He killed John Wilkes Booth. Now, just to remind you, John Wilkes Booth was the person who assassinated Abraham Lincoln. And so Boston Corbett, he was employed as a hat maker when he was a younger man. And funnily enough, started to display symptoms of mercury poisoning because soon after working in the factory, he became a religious zealot. And in 1858, castrated himself with a pair of scissors as a way to curb his libido.
Ooh.
I mean, it's like trying to saw your arm off with a penknife.
That tells you somebody is crazy.
So anyway, so he went on to serve in the Union Army after he did that.
Okay.
During the Civil War, obviously it was conscription, so, It's not like they did a full...
I'm guessing they didn't know that he was not so.
Yeah, it probably helped, really. He probably made a great soldier at the time because he was, a fanatic. And so he was in the Union Army. And after Lincoln was shot by Booth on the 14th of April in 1865 in Washington, D.C., Corbett and his regiment, the 16th New York Cavalry, they were sent to track him down. And he was on the lam at the time, John Wilkes Booth. So on April the 26th, so barely 2 weeks after, they surrounded him in a barn somewhere in Virginia. And even though they were supposed to bring him back alive, Corbett shot and killed him. And he was cleared of blame, etc., by the military, and he was seen as a hero by many because obviously he killed the man who killed their president. And eventually, guess where he went? Back to the hat industry.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, he was already crazy. I mean, how much worse could it get, to be honest?
Or maybe, I wonder if he knew. So the story doesn't end there. He went back to the hat making industry after the end of the Civil War. And then in 1878, he moved to Kansas and he lived a solitary existence as a homesteader. Nobody heard much from him for about 8 or 9 years. And then in 1887, he landed in a mental asylum after threatening a group of people at the Kansas Steakhouse. Sorry, not the Kansas Steakhouse. The Kansas State House. So it wasn't people at a restaurant eating steaks who were disturbed. It was lawmakers. Sorry. They might have been eating steaks. Who knows?
Who knows?
So he held them up with a gun. And so he was put in a mental asylum. And the year after, he was probably in his 50s by this point. He escaped and then was never heard of again.
Oh, so he got out. Well done, him.
Yeah, I mean, it shows enterprise, but also he castrated himself with a pair of scissors. So
Yeah, I guess. Oh, God. Wow, that is disturbing.
that is disturbing.
Very.
I thought it was such an interesting aside to this little innocuous story of mercury poisoning.
No, but also, speaking of phrases that derive from hats,
Ragini's swiftly moving on.
look, when I have a segue, I take my segue. But okay, so there are a bunch of them that are quite fun and cool
Okay.
because they have really interesting stories around them. So the phrase hat trick basically appeared first in 1858 in cricket to describe English cricketer H.H. Stevenson's taking 3 wickets in 3 consecutive deliveries. Fans were so happy about this, they held a collection for him. And with the proceeds, they bought him a hat.
Oh.
And so the term was popularized as a hat trick.
Do you think they did the collection in a hat?
Sure. Okay, well, we're back with the cheap thrills once
Painting
again.
a picture. So he was the man who did the first hat trick. Was that the first time ever that anybody had done that?
It seems to be,
Wow.
because clearly he got everyone excited enough to buy him a hat.
Cool.
So, well done. I'm all about the stories this episode, clearly. But there's a very cool story about the phrase, eat your hat.
Yes. Tell me.
So basically, I mean, the story around it is that the phrase first came up around King Charles II,
Yeah.
who apparently was quite a ladies' man and therefore was nicknamed Old Rowley after his most famous stallion. How creative and innovative, honestly.
Are we sure he was named after the horse and the horse wasn't named after his nickname? No.
No.
We're sure
No.
that he was named after the horse because...
I mean, as sure as I can be,
Yes.
based on Google, first page of Google.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm, you know me, I grind right down to the facts. So, yes, so Old Rowley was a stud.
Yes, O'Reilly was a stud named after his stud. And basically, he would wear these really flamboyant hats. So back in the day, it became a thing to say, oh my God, if that happens, I'll eat Old Rowley's hat. And then that got shortened to eat your hat. But this isn't the most interesting thing about this. It's about how, in recent times, this phrase has actually come into use and people have delivered.
Oh, God.
So back in 2014, a user on Reddit predicted that the value of one Bitcoin would never fall below $1,000 again. Of course, adding that he would eat his hat if they ever did.
And of course, it's someone from Reddit.
Of course. But when the value of the currency did fall, the user uploaded a video of themselves eating an entire cotton beanie on a sandwich.
Ew.
Like he ate it. There are, of course, incidents of politicians having said this and then conveniently circumventing having to do it by like eating a heart-shaped cake or a cookie. They're like,
that's a cute
pop out,
little
honestly.
way to get out of.
However, this is actually my swan song for this fact. But there is an example of the director Werner Herzog, who claimed that if Errol Morris ever finished the film Heaven's Gate, he would eat his shoes. And when Morris did finish the film, Herzog had a professional chef prepare his shoes with garlic and various herbs, and he ate them at the premiere of the film. Now, if anybody is interested, there is a documentary around this called Werner Herzog Eats His Shoe.
No.
So if you get that wrong, honestly, like...
If anybody forgets about the documentary about Werner Herzog eating his shoe, it's called Werner Herzog Eating His Shoe, and it will be in the blog.
Eats his shoe.
Isn't that a bit like stealing limelight from your friend? Oh, he's finally finished his film at the premiere. I will make it about me.
I will eat my shoe.
Yep.
Yeah, I never thought about that.
That's really interesting.
Okay. And this is a peek into the psyche of Werner Herzog. It's an appropriate addendum to the documentary.
So,
This is your favorite segment.
is it my favorite segment?
Yeah.
Okay. I quite like this, researching it, because
Yeah.
one of the basic things that we thought of when we were researching this episode was famous hats. Like, what's the most famous hat that came to my mind? Well, it was the Gandhi cap or the Gandhi topi.
And what segment are we in? Come on, do the song.
What song?
Your song, your pop culture song.
Pop culture! Sorry, I forgot.
Well done!
I forgot.
Getting louder and better.
It is getting closer to the mic every time. So, the Gandhi cap or the Gandhi topi, for people who aren't aware, is a white colored side cap that's pointed in front and at the back, and it has a wide band at the base. It used to be made out of khadi, but now more commonly it's made out of cotton. And it is named after the Indian leader Mahatma Gandhi, who was the one to first popularize it during the Indian independence movement. And at the time, it caught on like wildfire, and it was very commonly worn by Indian independence activists. It became like a symbol of the freedom struggle. And to this day, politicians in India and political activists wear it in support of work for the country or work to change something for the better in the country. So the first time that it emerged was during the non-cooperation movement during the Indian independence struggle between 1918 and 21. It became like the symbol of the Congress, the national political party at the time that was trying to barter for Indian freedom. And it became like a conscious creation of a headdress of any kind of like symbolic item to provide a pan-Indian twist to things. So it was echoed by all the top leaders at the time: Jawaharlal Nehru, Subhash Chandra Bose, Saifuddin Kichlu. The origin of the Gandhi topi is based on Gandhi himself, who wanted a cap suitable for Indian conditions. Basically, it was the correct material, it was the correct structure, it was not too elaborate, and you could literally make one at home. So he wanted something that would be able to be a uniting symbol for everybody who wanted to free India.
Oh, I did not know that.
Did you not?
I didn't know that. I didn't know like why he created the Gandhi topi. I mean, I knew about how it became a symbol. I didn't know that it had a practical purpose too.
And it was part of his Swadeshi culture movement that he tried to start, which is for Indians to take pride in the products and in the products created from resources in the country, and to encourage people to be more affronted by the taxes they were facing for the goods they themselves produced, as well as the fact that most of their goods all the luxurious goods were being exported. And, the Indian population wasn't having a chance to actually reap the benefits of its own work. So yeah, so this little topi, this little hat became the unifying symbol of someone just fighting for their freedom.
That's cool. Yeah, it was like sitting in history class in school all over again.
I did stumble a bit here and there, but I feel very conscious of not wanting.
Exactly like sitting in history class in school once again.
And Ragini and I know because we studied history together.
Yeah, we sat in class together. Okay, other famous hats, by the way, just to quickly recap. Winston Churchill's Homburg, very distinctive. Napoleon's Bicon. Then there is Abraham Lincoln's stovepipe.
Oh, Lincoln's stovepipe, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really tall center.
Yeah.
Oh, and there is Guy Fawkes' hat, which is called the Sugarloaf. And that's actually become quite iconic because every picture that you now see of Guy Fawkes has him with the sides are kind of like slanting, and then there's a bit of a band in, I think, red, and then there's a cone.
Oh, that's cute. I like that name, Sugarloaf.
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds like a term of endearment.
Hi there, Sugarloaf.
Sounds a bit rude, actually.
Yes.
So yeah, so the Guy Fawkes' Sugarloaf, and that's the end of that?
Yeah, imagine, just think about it. The most iconic hats in history belong to men. And considering that hats are a fashion symbol, you'd imagine that there'd be... But I did come across one. There was the Jackie Kennedy pillbox hat, the one that she wore at the assassination.
Yeah, famous for sad reasons.
That's pretty iconic. Yeah. So those are famous hats in history. I'm sure there are a lot more, but these were the ones that
yeah, if anybody's listening, I sound like I'm talking to aliens. If anybody's listening, show me a sign. Or ghosts. But if anybody listening knows any famous hats that we haven't mentioned, I'm sure there's many. Yeah, let us know. Email us. Email us a long list of hats and we'll add it to the addendum in the next episode.
Okay. And our last segment is fun facts.
As opposed to all the others that we've had in the episode.
Which were really not fun. These are the funnest.
Yeah, these are the funnest.
Funnest facts about hats.
They are fun.
So, did you know men's hats were taxed in the UK from 1784 to 1811? The tax payable was based on the price of the hat, and if you forged your hat tax revenue stamp, it was punishable by death.
Oh, God.
Yeah, people back in the day took everything very seriously.
Yeah, well, I suppose there was no TV or Netflix to distract them.
You slighted me. You wore a hat and you didn't pay tax.
And now you're forever dead to me.
And I will make sure of it.
So the hat tax, that's interesting.
Yeah. So basically, I was researching witches' hats, obviously. Obviously, I was researching.
I'm glad I'm looking at you right now because that sounded like something else. Continue, sorry.
What does it sound like?
Like bitches' hats. And I was like, ooh.
Oh, witches, guys, witches. Cannot enunciate more. You've seen a typical witch's hat, right? It's got the cone and the depiction of a witch in general, like, hideous, hunched over, black cloak, tall hat, was meant to be a caricature. And so there are two theories around this. One of which is that it basically was caricature of all outsiders, particularly anti-Semitic stereotypes in this case. In the 13th century, the Pope required all Jews to wear horned hats so no one would mistake them for Christians. So there's that. And the other is that in the 1700s...
That's terrible.
Yeah, terrible. But like Quaker women who would preach in public would wear these tall hats, and obviously in the Puritan society of the time, women who dared to preach found themselves in this very unwelcome and place in society, and also was the kind of behavior that led to the certain witches that became part of the Salem witch trials. But basically, it's a caricature depiction of these particular hats that they were made to wear, or they were wearing by choice, that eventually took on the role of what is now the stereotypical witch's hat.
Ah.
And lastly, this is kind of cool as well. You know that French-made costume and the little French-made cap that the costume comes with?
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm wondering where this is going.
So many directions. No, but back in the day, working women who basically required to serve, women who were nurses, cooks, basically lower class women who worked in any place that required them to have their hair off their face, would wear a version of the mop cap, which is much bigger. And then slowly in time, it started getting a bit smaller. But when the revolution went afoot, these women would just step out and had joined the revolution. And so the mop cap, which is what it's called, I found out, became a symbol of the revolution. So even now, when you see it as part of a French maid's outfit, or just anybody wearing a mop cap, it's actually a symbol of the revolution that has just carried on.
Cool.
Yeah.
Is it though?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically like it's just something that stayed on from the time of the revolution. I mean, I don't think it's so consciously defined any longer.
Yeah, because when I'm looking at a Halloween costume online, it says
It has nothing to do with the revolution.
French maid. That's not the first thing that struck me, but now it will be the first thing that will strike me if I see a mop cap. I have a tiny fact,
Yes.
a factlet, if you will. It's about cowboy hats,
Ooh. Huh.
especially in the films. So, in a standard cowboy movie at the time when they were popular, white hats denoted the good guys and black hats were for the bad guys. And this was almost consistently across the board. And it was, yes, because white is usually associated with the qualities of pureness and things like that. And black is, associated with like the witch's hat or like similar to vilifying a person. It was, considered a color for bad guys.
Oh.
The color convention, it stayed the same in the movies for years so that when they were recycling old stock footage, they could.
Ooh.
So because it was expensive to shoot films, they'd reuse things like sound effects, like footage of chases, stunts, and things like that. So they just reused them because usually they were shot from a far away angle. And so you couldn't really see faces, etc. If they rode the horse of the right color, you could reuse stock footage.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
wow.
another thing they used to do was to reuse sound from just pre-recorded sounds. So if someone fell off a horse, if someone got shot, if someone got stabbed, very often if you go back and listen, it's the exact same shout, a male voice shouting.
Really? So they never bothered dubbing for that?
I think it's called the Wilhelm scream. That's what that noise is called. It's a very common sound. And I think I will put in a little YouTube link to the Wilhelm scream.
Oh, cool.
It'll be like a 3-second clip of a man shouting.
Very cool.
I have another little factor about the oldest hat. Does that count, do you think, as something?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so I think we've talked about this before. I'm not really sure. But have you heard of this mummy called Otzi?
No, I don't think we've talked about this.
Yeah, we often talk about mummies. Otzi the Iceman, he's a mummy that was preserved in ice since the Copper Age.
Ooh.
And so his body is close to 5,300 years old. And it was discovered in 1991 by mountaineers in the Alps. And it's about like 100 kilometers northeast of Milan, which is an interesting example to use because this fact is fashion related. So not only were the contents of his stomach preserved, so people actually realized what little meal he'd had, which wasn't very interesting, by
What
the
did
way.
he eat? I'm interested.
Just some pulses and some, I don't know, some grain. I've forgotten right now. And this is why we say loosely fact-based. But what's interesting is also his clothes were preserved.
Oh.
So it gave us some prehistoric fashion secrets. And as you'd expect, his hat was made of fur, bear fur for his hat, and usually goat and sheep for coats and cattle leather for shoelaces.
Oh.
Yeah. So he had a fur hat on. It was made from brown bear pelt. And he also had an arrow quiver fashioned from roe deer leather.
Oh. Really put that meat factory to good use, huh?
Yeah. And he lived between around 3,300 BC. And he's called Otzi because he was found in the Otzal Alps. So Otzi's hat is possibly the oldest discovered hat at 5,300 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. Also a bit of a old-time fashion icon at this point.
I don't know if Otzi was walking around his tribe going, "Girl, look at my brown fur hat."
We'll be talking about this one for years.
Yeah. Now, fast forwarding 5,300 years,
Okay.
about 5,300 years, what do you think is the world record number of most hats worn at once? What do you think the number is?
200?
Wow.
No? Okay,
No,
50.
it's slightly more disappointing at 102 hats.
Oh.
It was broken by a Finnish, I think he's a YouTuber, judging from the video that they've posted on the Guinness book, Guinness record book website. It's this gentleman called Konsta Sajanto. And like I said, he's from Finland, and he wore 102 hats at a time. They were like your usual, I want to say flat cap, but it's not. Just your usual hat that the young folks wear these days.
Okay, well done.
A baseball cap. That's what I was looking for.
We did get there eventually.
We did. We got there. So it was like a wide-brimmed baseball cap, and he, just for technicalities, because if people want to attempt it, this is how he did it. He wore one facing forward and one facing backward, and then alternated until he got to 102. And then he held the pose for about 5 seconds and then celebrated by dabbing.
Okay, that's very true to the century that he's doing it in.
Yep. So that's the current world record. If anyone wants to have a stab at it, 103. That's what you have to get.
I wonder how tall 103 caps would be.
Not really. Not
very tall, right?
Tall. Yeah. No, it made him about, I think it was about 3 foot, 3.5 foot of hats.
I think I could beat that. I really think I could beat that.
Okay, so accompanying the blog for this episode will be a video of Ragini attempting to break this record.
Okay, then on that note, until next time, we will see you.
We hope you enjoyed. See you.
That's it for now. If you like the podcast, if you would like to tell us your thoughts about the podcast, or if you'd like to suggest a word that we could explore, follow us on Instagram. We are at Barely Research Facts. Drop us a comment, drop us a DM. We would love to hear from you. You could also visit our website, www.artnowthus.in. We'll see you next time.